Hi, I'm Chris Roselli.
And I'm Tina Thatch, and welcome to Western Window, a show made for you by students at Western Washington University.
Today we are delighted to introduce you to Office Hours, a thoughtful and impactful interview segment that addresses issues that touch each of our lives at one time or another. Our host is Dan Purdy, who is the director of Western's Front Door to Discovery program and is also an instructor in the College of Business and Economics.
Today's Office Hours discussion topic is compassion and suffering in the workplace. Joining Dan today are two faculty experts on the subject. Joanne DeMark is a leadership development specialist at Western, and Jason Kanov is a professor in the College of Business and Economics. This discussion will give us more of an in-depth look of how compassion and suffering impacts people in the workplace, how we can recognize signs of those suffering, and also what we can do to provide compassion and support for those in need.
So stay with us as we explore the world through Western Window and Office Hours.
Welcome to the inaugural show of Western's Office Hours, where we explore important topics in our world today and how Western is engaging with them. I'm Dan Purdy, your host. I'm director of the Front Door to Discovery, which is an office in university relations. I also teach innovation, entrepreneurship, and marketing in the College of Business and Economics. The topic for today's show is compassion and suffering. And if you work in any organization, whether it be a company, a nonprofit organization, a government agency, you've seen this problem at work. And that's really what we're going to focus on today is suffering in the workplace, its effects on us, what we can do about it, how we as managers, as leaders, as employees, as colleagues, how we can work on being compassionate, recognizing suffering, and hopefully improving the place that we all spend so much time, which is work. And I'm joined today by two wonderful educators, Dr. Joanne DeMark and Dr. Jason Kanov. Dr. DeMark heads our Western Leads program and works with student leaders in co-curricular and curricular activities. And Dr. Kanov teaches management and researches compassion in the workplace in the College of Business and Economics here at Western. So thanks to both of you for joining me today.
Nice to be here.
Great to be here.
What I'd like to start with first is just defining this idea of compassion. So often we use words, we don't really talk about what they mean particularly, so perhaps you can help me understand and unpack the idea of what compassion really means.
Yeah, the way people think about compassion, I think, sort of at the academic level depends on what discipline you're in. And I definitely think the word compassion is used in many different ways every day, you know, with random conversations about some kind of general sensitivity or care for people or just being kind of open or warm toward people. When we get into more of the academic discussion, you know, there's a deep history of compassion in various fields. And you know, what I see in psychology is a lot of psychologists talk about it as kind of an emotional state or discrete emotion. People talk about it as a virtue. In my fields, which is organizational behavior and management, we talk about compassion as a process. You know, we've introduced the idea of thinking about compassion as this interpersonal process that plays out and is influenced by the organizational systems within which it occurs. And you know, we start with like a really simple idea of what compassion is, which is it's the heart's response to suffering. And we've built on that idea to say that, you know, compassion is about suffering. It is ultimately about being there for people, connecting with people in their suffering, and it involves a process that is both emotional, you know, has feelings associated with it, but it also has cognitive elements as well as behavioral elements. That it's about doing something and taking action. And it's not just about this passive sort of feeling.
So it's not just feeling good for somebody or feeling bad for somebody, but rather what do you do with that feeling?
Yeah, it's a particular kind of emotional space that we're in when we're dealing with compassion, and there's an action element to it, whether it's deliberate action or deliberate inaction. That's aimed with trying to lessen or alleviate or help people deal with their suffering.
Right, right. Joanne, how does that resonate with you?
I think when I think about compassion, for me, that's has a lot to do with not only can I sense me, although sometimes people aren't compassionate because they can't even sense themselves, but it also means, can I sense you? Can I get you on a, idea? Am I tracking what you're saying and thinking? Can I track what your emotions are, even if you might not be putting words to them, that you're actually illustrating them through your actions, your demeanor, your attitude, and that I'm able to feel that with you.
Right, right. Can you feel others in your life?
Yeah,
right.
But while at the same time not where my feelings take over.
Right, right. That codependency aspect where we become parasitic, right? Now, you've made a study of compassion in organizations.
Yeah, we've done, a few, yeah.
Why is, I mean, we talk about it at an individual level, and it becomes really clear really quickly why it's important, but why is it important as institutional or organizational level?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who studies organizations and organizational processes, compassion is really ultimately a human thing. It's not an organizational thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to really say that an organization can feel empathic concern, because an organization doesn't feel in any sort of analogous way to people. Right. But an organization can support or undermine the doing of compassion and the way people feel. So an organization, through its policies, through its leadership, through its structure, can make it easier for people to connect with their own suffering, to express their suffering, to witness and observe and connect with other people's suffering,
right.
and to take action in ways that actually make a positive difference. Or those same kinds of policies and practices, like in a different way, can really disable a lot of that and make it very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So, an organization that has that leaves employees with this feeling that, your personal life is your personal life and don't let it interfere with your work.
Right.
If you have something going on in your personal life, that's your problem, and you better figure it out. And as long as you still perform well, you're in good standing. But if this stuff creeps in and it affects you, we have a problem. And that kind of policy, that kind of leadership may seem, professional, like we were talking about before.
Right.
But it's really counterproductive to the whole idea of being with each other emotionally and helping people through things and being really human.
Right, right.
So I can think of both a leadership idea connected to that, and also a Western example of what I think would be one of the ways that we actually, as an organization, show that kind of compassion. The leadership discussion is that leadership previously had been defined as industrial, and that really does mean leave your person at the door.
Versus emotional, where you can be
That's
a human
right.
being.
So now that in a post-industrial discussion of leadership, we'd say, well, that's really about relationship. That leadership is not me doing and you following, or you doing and me following. It really is something about a relationship in here.
Right.
I'm quoting Joe Garcia, actually, in a definition that he gives.
Dr. Joseph Garcia, who teaches leadership at Western.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think there's the example that I think of that where the organization can represent the caring, not that the organization is showing it, this is people, is that when President Shepard came to campus, and knowing that there's this influx of veterans returning to the States and going to college, and what is the way that we show that you come both in your valor and your courage and your experience. You also come in your leadership, but you also come in your suffering, because those experiences certainly weren't easy. And so then to institute a Veterans Day commemoration where the veterans actually get to talk, they get to reach out with each other, to put in student government, Veterans Outreach Office. Those were all powerful organizational signals. So the signaling ends up showing this is actually something that we care about. You can see it in these 5, 6, 7, 8 things.
Right, supporting the idea of compassion and compassionate behavior.
Yeah. Well,
As opposed to saying to a veteran, okay, you know, that you go to the counseling center, get
Right.
your therapist,
Right.
treat your wounds, but there's not a place for a student veteran to have that here and to be witnessed in that.
And embracing the whole person.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you know, I think leadership is really important. I mean, in an organizational setting, leadership is really important for really affecting the whole system. But I mean, you know, an assumption that I would make coming into this area of study is that, you know, we are, I think an assumption that has been made by many over the years is that, you know, people are naturally compassionate. People suffer, that's part of being human. People are compassionate, that's part of being human. It's just part of our basic humanity. And, you know, I think that we've interestingly created, I mean, I haven't studied this per se, but my sense is that we've really created a lot of ways to distance ourselves from our own humanity.
Yes.
You know, for various reasons. Maybe some of them seemed like a good idea at the time, but
Right.
in a lot of ways we've distanced ourselves from our own compassion, and we judge other people who suffer, and we have institutional practices or cultural norms that lead us to distance ourselves from suffering, or to not see it in certain situations, or to explain it away.
Right.
And
To almost tacitly encourage people to suffer in silence.
yeah,
Simply, how are we trained to be hardened, right? And then what's the way that we can take the lid off of that? So I think with undergrads at Western, and particularly through, probably in management certainly, but in the leadership studies courses and also the co-curricular leadership activities, we work to have people looking at their own character, the character of others, and noticing, just sort of noticing that. And when I say noticing affectively, I'm really meaning not only what was, again, not what was the idea of something, but did you have a feeling about it? And what was that feeling? What was your second feeling? What was the feeling after the first feeling and the second
Right. So
feeling?
getting beyond the cognitive realm into the feeling realm. And Jason, I know that when you talk about sort of the process of compassion, one of the things you talk about is noticing, just simply noticing.
yeah. I mean, it kind of goes without saying that if you're not aware that somebody's suffering, it's hard to really imagine how you could come to be compassionate about it, right? So
Right.
you have to have a sense that it's there, and it's not just about kind of seeing something when it happens. It's about, you know, like, the more I know you, the more I'm going to know how you are normally.
Right.
The more disconnected we are from each other, the more individually focused we are, the more busy we are and multitasking we try to be, the less mindful we are, the less present we are, the less attuned to each other we are, and the harder it is to do anything resembling compassion, because we're just not even able to sense the need for it.
Right. We're disconnected in a way.
Yeah.
So then in classes or at the start of leadership training in associated students or with resident advisors, we might actually define mindfulness. Mindfulness is present moment awareness,
Right.
absent efforting or judgment. It means my brain's not getting busy trying to make this better. I'm not judging myself. I'm not efforting. I'm really noticing, oh, there's a tiny bit of saliva here on the left of my lips, or my feet are comfortable the way that they're crossed, really to kind of slow it down.
And how often does that happen in life, where you are present in the moment and not judging and not thinking about anything else other than the moment?
Right.
That to me seems really a rare skill for people to have.
Well, especially in American culture, I mean, it's and people say they're too busy to be mindful. That's the whole point, right? I mean,
Right.
we're like, I don't have time to meditate because and part of and I don't meditate. I mean, I don't. I mean, I think about, maybe I should, because of what we're interested in, but. I know that there's a lot of people who are studying mindfulness in different ways and showing the huge health benefits and social benefits we're finding now that come with more mindfulness, more focus on the present, being able to slow down, if not all the time, at least sometimes, so that you can be reflective. Like, I may in a day be swept up in the busyness of it, but if I have a practice at the end of the day of being able to reflect back and saying, you know what, I didn't notice it at the time, but Dan seemed a little off today. I wonder if he's okay. and maybe
Right.
I'll check in about that tomorrow. You know, that would be better than not doing that, certainly. And by being more connected and being more attuned and being able to slow down from time to time, more becomes possible. You know, things that we didn't think we could do, suddenly we can, and we can start developing these other capabilities and capacities.
Right.
I think it's good too to teach students some in the leadership side anyway, to teach some leadership models that incorporate that. So.
Right. Yeah. Unpack that for us. What do you do?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do with leadership scholars who come in, first quarter freshmen, and they read Dr. King's article from his book Strength to Love.
Martin Luther King.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's called Tough-Minded and Tender-Hearted. And so people think about civil rights struggle, and they didn't necessarily think about compassion being a key piece of that, but the whole premise of nonviolent resistance actually was very much based in a compassionate outlook where I could engage my oppressor by also being tender-hearted about, quote, my oppressor. So
because this is all risky. I mean, because it's sort of countercultural, there's a lot of, you know, should I tell people that I'm going through a hard time right now? And
am I weak if I do?
Right, and as a leader, like, will I lose faith of my followers? You know, quote unquote.
Is this touchy-feely?
Yeah, right, and there's so many stigmas associated with that, and just a lot of reasons not to do it. I mean, we could very easily talk ourselves out of this, but you know, that comes at a cost. I think that there's a tendency, I think, no matter what kind of change we're talking about, to say, well, if I do it differently, I'm opening myself up to these risks, so I don't want to face those risks, so I want to preserve the status quo. But a lot of times when we do this comparison of the status quo to the way it could be, we forget to note that there are a lot of risks and downsides of the status quo, you know, and like our own like life expectancy could be diminished to the extent that we don't actually care about each other more. I mean, again, there's a lot of research going on in different disciplines about compassion, showing that there are physiological benefits to forming stronger relationships with people and to showing care, not just being cared for, but to care for others. Has a benefit on the carer, you know, as well as on the recipient or the beneficiary of that care.
And the absence of care, if someone doesn't feel cared for, how could that negatively impact them to the point where they perhaps don't perform as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, even if you're totally instrumental about it all, you should still want compassion.
Meaning sort of the cost-benefit analysis of, oh, gee, should we do this or not?
Even if you look at it from this perspective of, like, how do I boost performance in my organization, which, I mean, I don't ideally would wish people would be a little bit more, you know, big picture.
Do it for the right reasons.
But still, I mean, even if you care just about that, it still makes sense to be more mindful, to cultivate that in your culture of the organization.
Yeah, I heard one time an author talk about the difference between kindness and liking, and that you can be very kind to someone and not like them, and that it's important that we be kind to people even if we don't like them, because if you're not, right, you reap what you sow. Right? You get in return tenfold what you put out there. So Joanne, you've done some pretty startling research with some of your students in terms of how they perform sort of against their peers, if you will, and I'm talking specifically about the students who are in leadership positions.
We actually looked at paraprofessional student leaders on campus.
So what are paraprofessional? What's that?
Paraprofessional student leaders would be like the resident advisors, the RAs, the peer health educators, the sports club leaders.
Right, so they're students who work on campus.
Student government.
Right, in official positions.
Exactly, and in a lot of ways doing, you know, assisting in the student service components of
professional level work.
Exactly. And we had a random sample from a national leadership study, a random sample from our campus of students, and then this comparison sample of these paraprofessional, and they could be paid or volunteer, but paraprofessional student leaders. And what we found is that our paraprofessional student leaders were statistically significantly higher capacities on all 7 of these capacities for social change than our comparison sample, the national comparison sample, and according to the national researcher, also than most other comparison samples at other universities. So we like to think at Western about, we are already lucky in the students that come here because they generally tend to be motivated and like to see the world turn out better.
Right.
But then something that we're doing with the paraprofessional student leaders or experiences that they are having is actually bumping that up.
Right.
And as we did a little qualitative research looking at that, where we asked staff what did they think, and we also asked the students themselves what did they think were making some of the differences in that.
Right.
Some of that included high impact practices like sociocultural peer conversations, so that you're talking about important matters with each other.
Right. That's
and
sensitizing, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And some of that, these, and these are sociocultural peer conversations that are actually things that we care about.
Right. I'd like to turn now a little bit to where do we go from here? We've talked a lot about compassion as it exists in organizations, how our students are learning about it. How do we get more compassion, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, kind of the realm that I work in, it's all about it's largely about trying to understand the person within the system and the system itself, and how an organization can be a place that is oppressive and is dehumanizing, or it can be a place that is very enlivening and that awakens and helps us connect with our humanity. And whether it's in helping us develop these practices through the culture of the organization, through the leadership, through these things that draw these things out of us, or that support them when they happen and encourage that, or whether it's just even in my classes, related to compassion is trying to talk about these ideas of how do we remember that when we're a leader, when we're working with people, that we're really working with people, and they're not tools, and they're not means to an end, and they're not, human, like devoid of their humanity and assets that we can manipulate, like we could manipulate some sort of material.
Right.
How do we bring a sensitivity to that? And I'm struck, as you talk about reflective and reflectful and sensitivity. I mean, these are words that make some people like cringe. You said soft before,
yeah, right.
And so part of it is about just really saying like there's competence in this. It's we care about whether a person knows how to do their job, and we train them on that.
Right.
But what we really need to also appreciate is that there are things that are not directly task related, but that are related to how we manage each other and ourselves, that are also really indispensable skills and capabilities. And we should be training on that. We should be incentivizing that if we can, in some ways that we incentivize like any work, like we should value it.
When was the last time you saw a job description that said compassionate, mindful, right, reflection-oriented individual? I'm still waiting.
Even when you see things that are kind of approaching that, like good with people, or like nobody really knows what they're talking about.
That's right. How does that behavior?
Yeah, I mean, what
translate?
does that
It's so
actually
subjective.
Where's the recognition system that would recognize it? I love that kind of thinking.
Yeah, so the more we can kind of say that this is legitimate, and this really matters, and it also happens to matter for performance and profitability, or whatever the more stereotypical things an organization might care about, which are not unimportant.
No.
But these things can drive that while also doing this other stuff that is very important, and that can make me feel more connected to my organization over the long term, can encourage me to not only work harder, but to want to work harder over the long term and to work better. That can help me do things that benefit the organization in really intangible ways. Because I'm more my full self here, and I feel that this place allows me to be me. And this allows me to be connected to people who are also their full true selves, and it becomes a part of my life, as opposed to this like thing that I got to get through this week so that I can spend my real life on the weekend.
Right.
Joanne? I was thinking about the advantage of some of the evolving management and leadership paradigms that have people who are thinking about those, people who are moving into leadership roles, thinking about the whole system, not just the individual as a living organism, but the whole system as a living organism. And then how would we characterize that? From the research about organizational culture on, there is this sort of sense that you actually could characterize the quality of an organization in those caring kinds of ways. You could even see it in a customer service moment, that it could be showing itself. And then I think there's also something about, it used to be talked about in terms of the process matters as much as the outcome. And this speaks much more to is my authentic self welcomed in the workplace?
Right.
And is your authentic self welcomed in the workplace? And that the best of our creativity and productivity might occur the more authentic and real that we get to be at work.
Right.
Including the burdens, the suffering, the pain.
Well, and we hear a lot about the triple bottom line approach to business, right? People, planet, and profit. And I think this topic hits so much on people, but I think also in terms of profitability for those who out there who are, perhaps would love to see it happen, but maybe you're afraid to put it forward. I read somewhere that, and it might have been in one of Jason's papers, that up to $75 billion a year in productivity is lost due to suffering in workplaces in the organizational sphere.
Oh yeah, and that's actually just that is actually a dated statistic, and it's also just one kind of suffering.
Right.
I mean, like, this is hard to calculate, which is one of the reasons why it's hard to convince people about it, because I can see that if we have X amount of quality control problems that cost us X amount of dollars, that's pretty clear. Right. But I don't see how, like, you suffering right now, it does affect performance and it does affect profitability, but it's a long relationship, and it's hard to put two variables next to each other to show that direct causal thing, and so people don't see it as readily. But it's huge. I mean, people will be better off across the board if we can, be supported to get through our suffering, if we can be more connected to each other.
Right. Well, and I'm heartened by the companies out there that are doing this, right? Companies like Zappos, for instance. I just read today that Amazon came out with that they'll pay you to quit. If you're unhappy, they understand, and they'll pay you up to $5,000 to go somewhere else. And the reasoning is, if you're not happy, that's not good for you, and it's not good for us. Yeah. And that's a compassionate mechanism. And I don't see too many companies doing that, but I'm excited about the ones that are thinking about it. We're out of time, and I want to thank you guys so much for a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot personally. I hope that our audience has benefited as well. And this is really such an important topic. We've only just barely scratched the surface. There's so much more that we could talk about if we had time. But I want to thank our audience for joining us today with the inaugural edition of the Western Washington University Office Hours, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
That wraps up this segment of Office Hours and this episode of Western Window.
Be sure to tune in next time as we explore the world at and around Western Washington University.